大家好，
大家好，
又到讀你聽嘅時候啦。讀咩書啊？我哋
Charles Dickens 嘅 Great Expectations
第幾節啦？
第49。
冇錯啦，49節啦。咁啊，上回48節咧就講到阿 Pip 咧就 find out 咗有呢個 molly 嘅呢個人咧，佢咧就係啦，即係佢懷疑佢啦，會唔會係 estella 個阿媽啦？即係過去即係做咗一連串嘅行為，就令到 Mr. Jaggers 咧就覺得即係 molly 同埋佢個女都係
唔係好
出身唔好啦，即係惹官非啦，殺過人啦，咁啊有啲好複雜嘅上一代嘅情緣啦、孽緣啦咁嘅嘢啦。咁啊 Pip 都係聽嘅啫，聽阿 Mr. Jaggers 講嘅啫。而 Pip 喺呢個時間咧，其實佢就係擔心緊阿 marriage 嘅安危，係咪？又要擔心個 competition 會唔會隨時出手，係嘛？揭發咁所以其實呢一刻咧，佢真係冇乜心機嘅，即係聽
多嘢諗啦，
好多嘢諗啦咁佢最迫切嘅當然就係其實就係快啲送走 marriage 啦。即係佢成日匿喺間屋度都唔係辦法嘅，係咪？咁希望個故事就進一步推進啦，因為都步入尾聲㗎啦，係咪？咁我哋嚟到第49節啦，我哋繼續讀啦，好嗎？
好。
Putting Miss Havisham's note in my pocket, that it might serve as my credentials for so soon reappearing at Sadie's house, in case her waywardness should lead her to express any surprise at seeing me. I went down again by the coach next day, but I alighted at a halfway house and breakfasted there and walked the rest of the distance, for I sought to get into the town quietly by the unfrequented ways and to leave it in the same manner. The best light of the day was gone when I passed along the quiet echoing courts behind the High Street, the nooks of ruin where the old monks had once had their refectories and gardens, and where the strong walls were now pressed into the service of humble sheds and stables, were almost as silent as the old monks in their graves. The cathedral chimes at once a sadder and a more remote sound to me as I hurried on avoiding observation than they had ever had before. So the swell of the old organ was borne to my ears like funeral music, and the rooks, as they hovered about the great tower and swung in the bare high trees of the priory garden, seemed to call to me that the place was changed and that Estella was gone out of it forever. An elderly woman, whom I had seen before as one of the servants who lived in the supplementary house across the back courtyard, opened the gate. The lighted candle stood in the dark passage within, as of old, and I took it up and ascended the staircase alone. Miss Havisham was not in her own room, but was in the larger room across the landing. Looking in at the door, after knocking in vain, I saw her sitting on the hearth, in a ragged chair, closed before and lost in the contemplation of the ashy fire. Doing as I had often done, I went in and stood touching the old chimney piece, where she could see me when she raised her eyes. There was an air of utter loneliness upon her that would have moved me to pity, though she had wilfully done me a deeper injury than I could charge her with. As I stood compassionating her and thinking how, in the progress of time, I too had come to be a part of the wrecked fortunes of the house, her eyes rested on me. She stared and said in a low voice, "Is it real?" "It is I, Pip. Mr. Jaggers gave me your note yesterday, and I have lost no time." Thank you. As I brought another of the ragged chairs to the hearth and sat down, I remarked a new expression on her face, as if she were afraid of me. "I want," she said, "to pursue that subject you mentioned to me when you were last here, and to show you that I am not all stone. But perhaps you can never believe now that there is anything human in my heart." When I said some reassuring words, she stretched out her tremulous right hand, as though she was going to touch me, but she recalled it again before I understood the action, or knew how to receive it. You said, speaking of your friend, that you could tell me how to do something useful and good, something that you would like done, is it not? Something that I would like done very much. What is it? I began explaining to her that secret history of the partnership. I had not got far into it when I judged from her looks that she was thinking in a discursive way of me, rather than of what I said. It seemed to be so, for when I stopped speaking, many moments passed before she showed that she was conscious of the fact. Do you break off? She asked then, with her former air of being afraid of me, because you hate me too much to bear to speak to me. No, I answered. How can you think so, Miss Havisham? I stopped because I thought you were not following what I said. Perhaps I was not, she answered, putting a hand to her head. Begin again, and let me look at something else. Stay, now tell me. She set her hand upon her stick in the resolute way that sometimes was habitual to her, and looked at the fire with a strong expression of forcing herself to attend. I went on with my explanation and told her how I had hoped to complete the transaction out of my means, and how in this I was disappointed. That part of the subject involved matters which could form no part of my explanation, for they were the weighty secrets of another. So, said she, assenting with her head, but not looking at me, and how much money is wanting to complete the purchase? I was rather afraid of stating it, for it sounded a large sum, £900. If I give you the money for this purpose, will you keep my secret as you have kept your own? Quite as faithfully. And your mind will be more at rest, much more at rest. Are you very unhappy now? She asked this question, still without looking at me, but in an unwonted tone of sympathy. I could not reply at the moment, for my voice failed me. She put her left arm across the head of her stick and softly laid her forehead on it. I am far from happy, Miss Havisham, but I have other causes of disquiet than any you know of. They are the secrets I have mentioned. After a little while she raised her head and looked at the fire again. It is noble in you to tell me that you have other causes of unhappiness. Is it true? Too true. Can I only serve you, Pip, by serving your friend? Regarding that as done, is there nothing I can do for you yourself? Nothing. I thank you for the question. I thank you even more for the tone of the question, but there is nothing. She presently rose from her seat and looked about the blighted room for the means of writing. There were none there, and she took from her pocket a yellow set of ivory tablets, mounted in tarnished gold, and wrote upon them with a pencil in the case of tarnished gold that hung from her neck. You are still on friendly terms with Mr. Jaggers? Quite. I dined with him yesterday. This is an authority to him to pay you that money, to lay out at your irresponsible discretion for your friend. I keep no money here, but if you would rather Mr. Jaggers knew nothing of the matter, I will send it to you. Thank you, Miss Havisham. I have not the least objection to receiving it from him. She read me what she had written, and it was direct and clear, and evidently intended to absolve me from any suspicion of profiting by the receipt of the money. I took the tablets from her hand, and it trembled again, and it trembled more as she took off the chain to which the pencil was attached, and put it in mine. All this she did without looking at me. My name is on the first leaf. If you can ever write under my name, I forgive her, though ever so long after my broken heart is thus prey to it. Oh, Miss Havisham, said I can do it now. There have been sore mistakes, and my life has been a blind and thankless one, and I want forgiveness and direction far too much to be bitter with you. She turned her face to me for the first time since she had averted it, and to my amazement, I may even add to my terror, dropped on her knees at my feet, with her folded hands raised to me in a manner in which, when her poor heart was young and fresh and whole, they must often have been raised to heaven from her mother's side. To see her with her white hair and her worn face kneeling at my feet gave me a shock through all my frame. I entreated her to rise, and got my arms about her to help her up, but she only pressed that hand of mine which was nearest to her grasp, and hung her head over it and wept. I had never seen her shed a tear before, and in the hope that the relief might do her good, I bent over her without speaking. She was not kneeling now, but was down upon the ground. Oh, she cried, despairingly. What have I done? What have I done? If you mean, Miss Havisham, what have you done to injure me? Let me answer, very little. I should have loved her under any circumstances. Is she married? Yes. It was a needless question, for a new dissolution in the desolate house had told me so. What have I done? What have I done? She wrung her hands and crushed her white hair and returned to this cry over and over again. What have I done? I knew not how to answer or how to comfort her. That she had done a grievous thing in taking an impressionable child to mold into the form that her wild resentment, spurned affection, and wounded pride found vengeance in, I knew full well. But that, in shutting out the light of day, she had shut out infinitely more, that in seclusion she had secluded herself from 1,000 natural and healing influences, that her mind, brooding solitary, had grown diseased, and all minds do and must and will that reverse the appointed order of their Maker, I knew equally well. And could I look upon her without compassion, seeing her punishment in the ruin she was, in her profound unfitness for this earth on which she was placed, in the vanity of sorrow which had become a master of mania, like the vanity of penitence, the vanity of remorse, the vanity of unworthiness, and other monstrous vanities that have been curses in this world? Until you spoke to her the other day, and until I saw you in a looking glass that showed me that I once felt myself, I did not know what I have done. What have I done? What have I done? And so again, 20, 50 times over, what had she done? Miss Havisham, I said, when her cry had died away, you may dismiss me from your mind and conscience, but Estella is a different case. And if you can ever undo any scrap of what you have done, amiss in keeping a part of her right nature away from her, it will be better to do that than to bemoan the past through 100 years. Yes, I know it, but Pip, my dear, there was an earnest woman compassion for me in her new affection. My dear, believe this. When she first came to me, I meant to save her from misery like my own. At first, I meant no more. Well, said I hope so. But as she grew and promised to be very beautiful, I gradually did worse, and with my praises and with my jewels and with my teachings and with this figure of myself always before her, a warning to back and point my lessons, I stole her heart away and put ice in its place. Better, I could not help saying, to have left her a natural heart, even to be bruised or broken. With that, Miss Havisham looked distractedly at me for a while, and then burst out again. What had she done? If you knew all my story, she pleaded, you would have some compassion for me, a better understanding of me. Miss Havisham, I answered, as delicately as I could, I believe I may say that I do know your story, and have known it ever since I first left this neighborhood. It has inspired me with great commiseration, and I hope I understand it and its influences. Does what has passed between us give me any excuse for asking you a question relative to Estella? Not as she is, but as she was when she first came here. She was seated on the ground with her arms on a ragged chair and her head leaning on them. She looked full at me when I said this and replied, Go on. Whose child was Estella? She shook her head. You don't know? She shook her head again. But Mr. Jaggers brought her here or sent her here. Brought her here. Will you tell me how that came about? She answered in a low whisper and with caution. I had been shut up in these rooms a long time when I told him that I wanted a little girl to rear and love and save from my fate. I had first seen him when I sent for him to lay this place waste for me. Having read of him in the newspapers before I and the world parted, he told me that he would look about him for such an orphan child. One night he brought her here asleep, and I called her Estella. Might I ask her age then? 2 or 3? She herself knows nothing but that she was left an orphan and I adopted her. So convinced I was of that woman's being her mother, and I wanted no evidence to establish the fact in my own mind. But to any mind, I thought that connection here was clear and straight. What more could I hope to do by prolonging the interview? I had succeeded on behalf of Herbert. Miss Havisham had told me all she knew of Estella. I had said and done what I could to ease her mind. No matter with what other words we parted. Twilight was closing in when I went downstairs into the natural air. I called to the woman who had opened the gate when I entered that I would not trouble her just yet, but would walk round the place before leaving, for I had a presentiment that I should never be there again, and I felt that the dying lights were suited to my last view of it. By the wilderness of casks that I had walked on long ago, and on which the rain of years had fallen since, rotting them in many places, and leaving miniature swamps and pools of water upon those that stood on end, I made my way to the ruined garden. I went all round it, round by the corner where Herbert and I had fought our battle, round by the paths where Estella and I had walked, so cold, so lonely, so dreary all. Taking the brewery on my way back, I raised the rusty latch of a little door at the garden end of it and walked through. I was going up at the opposite door, not easy to open now, for the damp wood had started and swelled, and the hinges were yielding, and the threshold was encumbered with a growth of fungus. When I turned my head to look back, the childish association revived with wonderful force in the moment of the slight action, and I fancied that I saw Miss Havisham hanging to the beam. So strong was the impression that I stood under the beam, shuddering from head to foot before I knew it was a fancy, though to be sure I was there in an instant. The mournfulness of the place and time, and the great terror of this illusion, though it was but momentary, caused me to feel an indescribable awe as I came up between the open wooden gates where I had once wrung my hair after Estella had wrung my heart. Passing on into the front courtyard, I hesitated whether to call the woman to let me out at the lock gate of which she had the key, or first to go upstairs and assure myself that Miss Havisham was as safe and well as I had left her. I took the latter course and went up. I looked into the room where I had left her, and I saw her seated in the ragged chair upon the hearth close to the fire, with her back towards me. In the moment when I was withdrawing my head to go quietly away, I saw a great flaming light spring up. In the same moment I saw her running at me, shrieking, with a whirl of fire blazing all about her, and soaring at least as many feet above her head as she was high. I had a double-caped greatcoat on, and over my arm another thick coat. That I got them off, close with her, threw her down, and got them over her. That I dragged the great cloth from the table for the same purpose, and with it dragged down the heap of rottenness in the mist, and all the ugly things that sheltered there, that we were on the ground struggling like desperate enemies, and that the closer I covered her, the more wildly she shrieked and tried to free herself. That this occurred I knew through the result, but not through anything I felt, or thought, or knew I did. I knew nothing until I knew that we were on the floor by the great table, and that patches of tinder yet alight were floating in the smoky air, which a moment ago had been her faded bridal dress. Then I looked round and saw the disturbed beetles and spiders running away over the floor, and the servants coming in with breathless cries at the door. I still held her forcibly down with all my strength, like a prisoner who might escape, and I doubt if I even knew who she was, or why we had struggled, or that she had been in flames, or that the flames were out, until I saw the patches of tinder that had been her garments no longer alight, but falling in the black shower around us. She was insensible, and I was afraid to have her moved, or even touched. Assistance went sent for, and I held her until it came, as if I unreasonably fancied that, if I let her go, the fire would break out again and consume her. When I got up, on the surgeons coming to her and with other aid, I was astonished to see that both my hands were burnt, for I had no knowledge of it through the sense of feeling. On examination, it was pronounced that she had received serious hurts, but that they of themselves were far from hopeless. The danger lay mainly in the nervous shock. By the surgeon's directions, her bed was carried into that room and laid upon the great table, which happened to be well suited to the dressing of her injuries. When I saw her again, an hour afterwards, she lay indeed where I had seen her strike her stick, and had heard her say that she would lie one day. Though every vestige of her dress was burned, as they told me, she still had something for her old ghastly bridal appearance, for they had covered her to the throat with white cotton wool, and as she lay with a white sheet loosely overlying that, the phantom air of something that had been and was changed was still upon her. I found, on questioning the servants, that Estella was in Paris, and I got a promise from the surgeon that he would write to her by the next post. Miss Havisham's family I took upon myself, intending to communicate with Mr. Matthew Pocket only, and leave him to do as he liked about informing the rest. This I did next day, through Herbert, as soon as I returned to town. There was a stage that evening when she spoke collectedly of what had happened, though with a certain terrible vivacity. Towards midnight she began to wander in her speech, and after that it gradually set in that she said innumerable times in a low solemn voice, "What have I done?" And then, when she first came, I meant to save her from misery like mine, and then take the pencil and write under my name, "I forgive her." She never changed the order of these 3 sentences, but she sometimes left out a word in one or other of them, never putting in another word, but always leaving it blank and going on to the next word. As I could do no service there, and as I had, near home, that pressing reason for anxiety and fear which even her wanderings could not drive out of my mind, I decided in the course of the night that I would return by the early morning coach, walking on a mile or so, and being taken up clear of the town. At about 6 o'clock in the morning, therefore, I leaned over her and touched her lips with mine, just as they said, not stopping for being touched. Take the pencil and write under my name. I forgive her.
哇！即係呢一節就有啲動作喎，即係 Miss Havisham 係着咗火喎。
係咯，點解咧？
佢係咪自焚咧？
可能
啊，即係可能佢係自焚，即係佢唔似係唔小心啦。咁當然佢係望住啲火啦。佢有個習慣就係望住啲火諗嘢諗出神。咁可能因為佢精神恍惚啦。亦都係即係我諗幾個因素啦。即係一來就係佢將 estella 嫁出去，係咪嫁咗俾佢自己又唔開心啦。即係佢覺得佢孤獨啦，係嘛？亦都即係我諗辜負阿 Pip 都係其中之一樣。不過我諗佢好次要咯。我諗佢最主要都係即係可憐自己多啲咯。因為佢對住阿 Pip 都係同佢講，即係你唔好嬲我，如果你知道我嘅過去，你就會明白。而佢講到呢個位，其實佢都已經有少少精神有啲太恍惚，因為阿 Pip 點可能會唔知咧？咁但係阿 Pip 都不厭其煩同佢講話，我知道你發生咩事，我一早就知啦。咁咁一個着咗火嘅 Miss Havisham 嘅結果又點咧？就係、當然係傷啦。不過呢度又冇話佢好重傷嘅，佢個皮外傷還好，主要係佢個心個內心嘅傷，個內心嘅痛楚，而令到佢即係應該都康復唔到啦。即係佢嗰種抑鬱啊，即係有種抑鬱喺度，個抑鬱症啦。個抑鬱症我諗好唔反而阿 Pip 就算喺 Havisham 着火之前，佢都覺得佢都唔會再翻嚟，因為可能係因為 Havisham 嗰個狀態實在係太差而佢亦都冇咩要求啦喺 Miss Havisham。其實佢冇需要得到啲咩，佢就係同埋都係攞錢啦，但係就攞錢係去幫Herbert 嘅，就唔係幫佢自己。咁呢個就叫做係 Miss Havisham 嘅結局啦，就係一個
點解佢肯俾錢佢咧？
就係佢內疚啊嘛，因為佢嫁咗 estella 出去啊嘛。而佢都唔肯同阿 Pip 講，直至到阿 Pip 就兜歉問佢先至肯講，係咯，即係咁。咁 即係 reservation 其實係想賠償阿 Pip 本人嘅，但係阿 Pip 話我真係冇乜嘢嚇咁。同埋有一樣嘢好重要嘅就係阿 Pip 係有心理準備。其實阿 Pip 之前已經有諗過嚇，同埋即係佢爭在係要 Havisham 講出口嘅啫。咁 OK 咯，你講出口，咁然之後見到你咁呼天搶地咁慘，咁佢仲阿 Pip 仲可以點？咁但係阿 Pip 其實係有講嘅，佢話：與其你喺度呼天搶地，你不如做翻啲嘢，你不如做翻啲嘢去糾正件事啊！佢話：我話佢，但係 Havisham 話我糾正唔到。即係好似潑咗水出去咁樣收唔翻，即係咁。好啊，咁都幾戲劇性啦，亦都好悲慘嘅一個結局啦，對 Havisham 嚟講，即係唔係話佢死咗，但係即係佢哀莫大於心死啦，嗰句説話啦，即係個內心死咗。咁即係變咗個獨居老人。咁好啦，咁 Havisham 呢一 part 又處理咗啦，咁之後要點咧？其實基本上就搞掂咗啊 Herbert 呢一 part 啦，咁佢就真係可以安心去處理咩？係 relocate 啊 marriage 啊，係咪？即係要同啲 competent 啊呢啲正面交鋒啦，可能要。同埋即係佢知道咗 estella 喺 Paris 啦，咁可能可以嘗試去 locate 佢啦，好嘛？好啦，咁我哋下次再講好冇？OK，拜拜。